Hey guys, this is Recklessly Skeptical. Thanks for joining us for our second half of this week's podcast. This is going to be a discussion on political philosophy and the questions therein. We have a special guest with us, and we'd like him to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Beau Anderson, friend of Matt's, worked with him for a while. What else do you want to know?
So what do you align politically?
Okay, politically, now, as I've grown and learned, my beliefs align closest with the Libertarian Party.
Cool. And my name's Josh, just to get myself in there. A couple of quick things. I do want you to expand a little bit on that. What politicians, active or inactive, do you think you best align with politically?
Ooh, closest that I've really followed, that most people know, would be Ron Paul. Not perfectly aligned with him, but a lot of what he stands for and has pushed, I really find myself in line with him. Gary Johnson, presidential nominee last cycle for the Libertarian Party. Those are two of the names that jump out to me the most.
Okay, cool. So I just wanted to get that. So Matt, you wanted to go off with an introduction to that. And real quick, I guess, should I do this now or should I wait with introducing my side?
No, I think we can do it now.
Okay, so as far as my side goes, I would align most with Bernie Sanders, and that's out of any candidate that I've ever seen so far. I think that getting money out of politics which is probably something that me and Beau both agree upon, is a hugely important part, and that's the major reason why I get along or why I support Bernie Sanders. But I essentially everything that Bernie Sanders has said or done, I would go along with. So we'll dive into that in more depth in just a moment.
So, and we also wanted to mention another podcast, The Dignitary. Josh and I were guests on his podcast and did a little semi-debate, so go check him out. You can find him on Spreaker and on YouTube, The Dignitary.
Yep, and thank you, Jacob, for having us on if you are now currently listening.
Yeah, thanks. And so, like I said, this is going to be a discussion about political philosophy. And political philosophy follows the questions about the state, government, politics, and the enforcement of a legal code, ethics, and how a society should run and how we should act within a society. And we all know, obviously, there are countless political parties: Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Constitution, Independent. And I would like to start out by... Well, actually, no, we already covered that, so you guys just ignore me.
could go into a little more of background. I know, I was born and raised in a strictly Mormon conservative family.
Mm-hmm.
Raised up, everybody Republican. Sort of as I started studying and learning more, I found myself leaning more constitutionalist for a while until I discovered the Libertarian Party and found out. And the more I learned, the more I studied, and I'm like, yeah, I really... I found out my personal beliefs fit in with that group better than anybody else I've seen.
Yeah,
awesome.
And I actually, that's surprising. I have a fairly similar background. I was raised Mormon, grew up kind of with my parents on the Republican side, even though my dad's a registered Democrat, which is really funny to think about. Or at least that's what he claims, even though I don't think he's ever voted democratically in his whole time that I've been alive. He actually, my dad votes independently. As far as I know, he votes independent more often than he'll actually vote for Republican, except, of course, with Mitt Romney running, he was all gung-ho about him. But I think that was something that was common in the state. When I started becoming more aware of politics at age 18, I actually joined the Constitutionalist Party, and I don't think I've updated since then. I do actually identify mostly Democratic, but I consider myself more progressive. I don't like to align myself with any party. I think that's pretty common nowadays because some of the things that have been a reoccurring theme on this podcast is that our democracy is essentially managed, the politicians we have to choose from, by big money. And I think that there are a lot of us who are sick and tired of that. So give me just 1 second, and we'll actually get into the heart of the debate. So we took a short break just to kind of discuss what points we wanted to go over. And also something else that I want to make clear to any of the listeners, that even though this is going to be kind of billed as social democrat versus libertarianism, that this is not meant to be a debate. We're more trying to get a clear idea of what we disagree upon and why we disagree upon it, and then let you guys decide which explanation is better or which one you think is stupid. So I'm going to go ahead and let Beau take over with what he thinks the main philosophies behind libertarianism is.
All right. My personal viewpoint, I mean, everybody could probably define it differently, but is just trying to keep freedom to a maximum. You know, you've got three basic, inalienable rights that everybody's born with: life, liberty, and property. And government is a collection of individuals' rights set up to, what would I say? Government is a group of people all having our own individual rights and bringing those together as a collective. Instead of having to each defend them ourselves, we set up an organization to defend them as a whole and to protect each other and protect ourselves. And so I think that's the responsibility of government, is purely just to defend those rights and nothing else. To keep it at a minimalistic solution, at a smallest level, simple, and just to defend life, liberty, and property, and not force or coerce anybody into anything, and let people live out their life as they see fit, as long as they're not infringing on somebody else's rights.
Yeah, and fair point also for the listeners. I think that there's a lot that me and Beau do agree upon. Mostly social aspects we definitely do. And also I think that we're for not being the main player on the political stage, on the foreign in the world. Like, policing other governments or policing the world is not how either of us feel the military should be used. So the main philosophy is kind of going behind Bernie Sanders' idea, which is social democracy. Even though he calls himself a socialist, I think that's because he doesn't like to mince words. But reading articles, I think that's the best description of this position that I hold. And that is that there are aspects to our a government doesn't just need to fill in the basics. In order for us to have a high standard of living, there are things that need to be given to us, and there are things that need to be socialized. I don't think that we would have good access to medicine if there's not some socialization there. And there are other things that we socialize. We socialize our police department and fire department and our lower education levels. And I think that expanding that into healthcare and also into
higher education.
Higher education. Thanks, Matt. Is a positive thing. I think that the more people we have with more education, it's better. And I think that those burdens fall unevenly on the lower economical, the middle class and the lower class. So I think those are the main philosophies behind that. And again, I don't know where Beau would stop the government or at what level, and that's one of the reasons why I think it's good to explore these concepts. But I think that socialization of aspects of our lives is not a bad thing. So let's go on into the main things, unless there was anything you wanted to add at these points.
I was going to say, I don't know, just with personal things, I see, I like seeing things taken care of at the lowest form of government that it possibly can be handled at, and lowest form of government is just self-control, there's an individual versus next step would be like family, community, city, state, country. So I think each individual problem should be handled at the lowest level of government that it possibly can be.
Yeah, and I tend to disagree, just because there are things that like school. I think standardized testing in schools and that sort of thing should be uniform across the country. I think police departments need to be policed by government standards or government programs that are above police departments. I think that running those types of things at the lowest level possible wouldn't end up with the result that we really want. And I think that a government is built there and is put in place to sometimes do that with certain things. There are some things that I definitely would not want socialized, though, and I do want to make that clear. I'm not a pure socialist. So let's get into economics, because I think that's something that you and I would disagree upon. What is the government's role in the economy and in economics?
Government's role in economics, personally, to protect the individual. We all have a right to property, not just to get it, but the right to defend our property that we've worked for or that we've earned. A right to be protected from fraud. And so I think that's the government's real responsibility there, is to have protections in place that are going to keep the individual safe from being, safe from theft, from fraud, from embezzlement, things like that, but not to have the government support different companies or pass laws, rules, and regulations that give unfair market advantage to certain individuals over others.
Yeah, so give me an example of so do you think right now that so I guess there are two questions I have about that. Do you think that there are some places where we're deficient in protecting consumers? And then I'll follow up with the other question in a second.
Any places that we do not provide enough protection.
Yeah, so do you think that there's fraud that goes on in our current political economic situation?
Oh, there is. I think a lot of it, though, is probably from too much government or intervention, too much money changing hands behind the scenes, different tax breaks given to certain companies or individuals where others do not receive them.
So does economic polarity something that concerns you? Like, so do you think that the banks can become too big?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and I think that they are too big. I think that
I'd agree.
We're well past where they should be broken up. But so how do you think that a government should regulate that? If you think that too much government at that, or do you think that there should be some government intervention there?
I think the free market will regulate itself best a lot more. The closer you can get to a free and open market, the more it will regulate itself. I mean, competition will balance itself out, will break up monopolies. The more regulation you get, the harder, business licensing and other things like that make it a lot harder for an individual to get into certain markets. So many regulations, so many restrictions that really keep the free market from operating as it should.
Yeah, and see, this is where I think you and I definitely disagree. The free market, I think that unregulated, the monopolies come into place, and unless there is some sort of intervention, they don't naturally get broken up. Like, you can't undersell Walmart if you're a startup company. You can't undersell them. There's just no way you can do that. And I think the same is true with communications companies. Like Comcast is about to merge with Fox or Time Warner. So, I mean, in that is just an example of where the FCC said no, and I'm grateful that they did. But it's not just there. I mean, the banking powers that be are too big. I think that there's lots of companies where what ends up happening is you get polarization, which allows them to undersell any potential competition, and then we have larger issues.
Well, yeah, but with let's say with Walmart or whatever, not that I support them, I try to take my business elsewhere, but if a company gets so big that nobody else can undersell them, is that a bad thing? Because then consumers are getting the best product for the best price. There's no, I mean, that's sort of a win-win.
Not always.
Not always. But
so, I mean, here's what I see happening, and here's again a common complaint against communications companies is what they'll do is they'll drive out the competing businesses, and then they'll raise their prices.
Exactly.
And so again, that's why. How is that good for the consumer?
That's not. But then if you deregulate stuff, as soon as somebody starts jacking up a price too much, if there's open free market, somebody else will come in and undersell them. It just happened recently with what's that guy's name? That drug on the market. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, so I remember the story. The story is this guy raised he had a pill that was specific. I can't remember to what disease. I want to say that it's AIDS,
yeah,
but I'm not certain. And so what he did is he bought the patent for it and raised it up a bunch. And we'll get into patents more later, but that's a story that he's referring to. He raised it. I think if you Google
5,000%.
5,000% drug raise, that you'll find the story that we're talking about.
Yeah, the pill went from $13.50 a tablet to $750.
Yeah, and then
tablet.
not long after that, another company came out and said they would make a comparable drug and turn around and sell it for $1. That's free market right there. Somebody else came in, like, look, we can make money off this for this much, and that guy's going to lose his shirt now from that.
Well, we'll again.
Yeah,
let's hold on to that for when we actually get to patents.
I have a question on regulation, Beau, that I'd like.
Okay.
Well, I'd like both of you.
Okay.
So, and I'm not sure where you fall, but so you can look at a lot of companies that, especially oil companies that pollute really bad. How do you see? Should there be any regulation on pollution and stuff like that?
Definitely. Pollution is an infringement on other people's rights, other people's property. Like, we all breathe this air. We all live on this planet. You know, if you're living in a little house and somebody builds this enormous plant next to you and, you know, starts polluting the air, you have just lost, like, all your home value. They've infringed on your property rights. So, yeah, there definitely needs to be environmental regulations.
So
as
how
a protection for property.
How would that play out?
That's a good question because, I mean, that's a gray area. I don't know if there's a specific, you know.
Yeah, like would I complain to my city council and then they come back and give them a fine, or do police come and shut down the business, or some other regulatory board?
Some sort of. I mean, there needs to be, like, I agree with zoning for that specific reason, protecting their rights, their property, their value. There needs to be environmental regulations and controls because it does affect others, and fines, or else even regulations on hitting certain levels of, you know, clean air.
Okay.
What would I don't know how
So
else
you
to describe it exactly, but
you'd kind of just pull back and reform what we already have in a sense, right?
yeah, I mean, there's each individual. You know, it's a case by case. It's different, but yeah, there is.
Yeah, because
there is
companies
need for that.
Yeah, companies do have regulations in place. So I think Matt was just asking a clarifying point. So let's move to the next one. So healthcare, and just so you know, we have 12 minutes total left. So talking about healthcare, and then we'll move right into patents. So what do you think?
We might have to do a second half
of this?
Second half of a second half.
Yep.
All right, so going to healthcare, do you think that healthcare should be standard? It should be something that is a right to, as Bernie requests, is a right to every American, or how do you feel about that?
I disagree with that because purely for the reason healthcare is provided to you by someone else. If you say it's a right, you are forcing this other individual to take care of you. You're infringing on that individual's right, their life, and their liberty.
But we don't have that problem with somebody paying for like insurance. For one, I guess you could say insurance is voluntary, and I think that would be the objection you would take, right?
Yeah, well, it should be.
Yeah, and then but with things like police officers, firemen, I don't think you'd be for getting rid of that, right? I mean, those are all socialized, correct?
They are socialized, yes.
Infrastructure upkeep is something else that's socialized, that everybody's paying for. So even if I decide not to use any of the roads, I just use the very minimal amount of infrastructure, then why should I be forced to pay for that?
Well, yeah, I think a lot of those things should be set up to try to get the tax in to the people that are using it, like gasoline tax to provide to support the infrastructure, roads, and things like that. Try to get tax-specific things to pay for the service of people who are actually using it.
Yeah, and so, I mean, I disagree with I agree with the sentiment. Like, I understand the sentiment, and I think that that's uniform with what your other beliefs are. But I don't think so. I think that there are some things that exist in society that need to be paid for equally by people, and there's some things that need to be taxed regressively, and there are things that should be taxed progressively. Like, I think income tax should be a progressive tax, and I think that, yes, if you're a business owner and you're wealthy, you should pay more towards these things. And the other thing is I think that I mean, equal opportunity is something that I see as being important, and I think that healthcare is one of those things that can be absolutely devastating to somebody if they don't have insurance or if they're not taken care of. I mean, my sister was in an accident where she had over $100,000 in medical bills, and she's middle class. That way, if my parents had to pay for it, so she was over 18, so my parents didn't have to pay for it. But if they had to, they would have been bankrupt. I don't think that's an ethical. I think it's more ethical to say that this is something we should take care of as a society.
Yeah, but is it ethically right to pretty much steal money from somebody to pay for somebody else's health care?
And see, I think you're framing it the wrong way. I don't see it as stealing at all. I think that, yes, you pay a tax to take care of the people you live in society with.
Taxes are legalized plunder.
That's, again, your opinion. I don't think the framing is fair there. I think that it's biased framing. I think that there are... I think that taxes exist for a real reason, and it's part of living in a society that you should pay tax, and you should have to pay tax, and you should pay a tax, in some cases, proportionate to your income. But again, this is why we're having this conversation. We both obviously disagree. So let's get back to patents, because that seemed to be something that we could also disagree on.
Yeah.
So you were saying that. So we're just going to jump right back to the story that we started with. So you think that in that example, it looks like a company undersold the guy, but I think that there are other companies, drug companies, that have patents that they can jack up the price to an extraordinary amount. Right now, with the way that Big Farm stands, they can do that.
They can, and some companies do abuse that and take advantage of it. And I don't think that's not a result of a free market. That's a result of direct government regulations, FDA regulations and stuff, which, if were not in place, would allow for another company to step in and provide a product at a cheaper price, at a fair, reasonable price that both the consumer and the company are happy with.
Which gets me right to the question of, do you think patents and copyrights exist for a reason? Like, how do you feel about them? And you can take a moment to do that. Matt will start humming.
Matt will start. What are you gonna hum? No. No. Copyrights and patents. That's it's a gray area, because I think people, things like that, people should be allowed to step in and do some things, but it's also, the question is, what's considered your property, really? If it's something, a song you wrote, or something that you came up with, you invented, do you have the right to benefit from that? And so that's one where I don't know if I have a perfect answer on that. I'm still tossing that around and trying to figure that out exactly.
Yeah, and I think that's a tough question. I see where patents serve a purpose, and I also think that those patents can be abused. I think that pharmaceutical companies do overstep their bounds majorly, and I think that they do this often. I mean, like, the first years that a pill is introduced, you have to pay an extraordinary amount of money, and then once it gets past that, then all of a sudden it becomes something that other companies can make, and it becomes extremely affordable.
Yeah.
But I think that they do serve a purpose in that. Why would anybody do research? Why would there be any developments in the medical industry if there wasn't some sort of protection in place, if there wasn't some guarantee of profit in place?
Yeah, and I agree. That's, that is where it's a debate. Like, where do you draw the line? Okay, because that's a tougher one. I mean, not everything has a strict black and white answer.
Yeah, and so let's kind of get into the mindset of what do you think would be the correct way to come to that answer? Like, do you think that you would debate it, or that you would set up people to go and do research on the researchers, I guess? I mean, would you set up so how do you think you would come to an answer that's satisfactory?
I think it's something that definitely needs to be open discussion and looked into, researched, and maybe, I don't know, maybe some things loosened up. Like, if you look at different medicines or something along that lines, maybe not an exact copy of a certain drug, but similar things. Because, yeah, you do need motivation or reason for people to invest their money into research. If there wasn't some sort of protection on or return on investment on what they put into it, nobody would do it, and so there wouldn't be any sort of progression, which is needed. But yeah, to find a balance between that and protecting people from abuses is a tough question, and would probably take a lot of looking into to find out where the exact line should be drawn.
Yeah, and maybe it would be a case-by-case thing. Matt, did you have any other topics that you want to touch on or questions for us?
I'd like to know how you guys feel about free trade. I'm personally against it because I think they give it a catchy name. I find it funny that Republicans always talk about keeping jobs here in America, but they're the ones pushing for free trade, and then they ship all the jobs overseas. And I'd like to know how both of you guys feel about free trade.
So are you kind of referencing the TPP that's being worked on right now?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm against it. I don't have. So one of the things is I'm fairly out of the loop on what exactly the TPP entails, but from what I hear, it's not a good thing. It will ship jobs overseas, and it's done to. It could put strains on our relationships with China. I think that we need better protections for American companies and American workers, and so I'm against it, but I couldn't exactly state why.
I'll agree. On the TPP, I have not looked into it enough, but looking at free trade, I think trade between countries and open borders, shipping products back and forth is a good thing and only promotes economic growth.
Yeah, so I don't think that's what the TPP is.
I don't either.
So yeah, I think that we both agree on that. So I mean, are you at all concerned that maybe some of the jobs will get sent over that we need to have stay here?
No. You look at, I don't know. I think job shipping overseas, if that is where a company can provide a better product for a better price, I don't see that being a bad thing. Open trade.
But what can I just interject?
Yeah, go for it.
What they usually do is they go to extremely poor countries, and it's basically slave labor.
Yeah, we both look at each other.
Yeah.
I disagree with slave labor or anything, but I think
a nickel a day.
Yeah, you know what? I think the individual consumer should vote with their dollar on what they choose to support and who they choose to, do business with.
Okay, so I think that we are going to have to go into a second section because I don't think that we're done with this conversation. But we're out of time for this podcast. Do you want to continue the conversation, Beau, or should we wrap up for the day?
I can continue.
Okay, so we're going to take a break from this section because we are at our time limit, which is about half an hour. So thank you guys for listening. Check out there's going to be a second part to this conversation that me and Beau are having about social democracy versus libertarianism. So thank you guys, and check out the third part.